Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are watching us. Welcome to Neurology for Vet webinar series, which is kindly sponsored by Hallmark Advanced Veterinary Imaging. I'm delighted to welcome today two speakers, Citlalli Limpens and Paul Mandigers. Hi, everyone. We are going to present to us their latest paper published in Frontier in Veterinary Science. As you will have noticed, Simon Platt is unable to join us today, and we wish him all the best. Simon will be back for our next webinar in a couple of months. But before we start, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about our two speakers. First of all, Citlalli. Citlalli is actually from Belgium. She grew up in Mexico, where she studied a Bachelor in Science in Microbiology, with a specialization in mathematical biology. After graduation, she moved to the University of Amsterdam for a master in forensic science, where she again specialized in mathematical application of biology. She then moved to the Expertise Center of Veterinary Genetics in Utrecht University, where she is currently doing a PhD. Paul is very well known in the veterinary neurology circle. Paul and I, we've known each other for at least a good 20 years, if not more. He is a diplomate of the European College of Neurology and is currently associate professor in neurogenetics at the Expertise Center of Genetics at the Department of Clinical Sciences, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at Utrecht University. He also worked as a clinical researcher at the Evidentia Arnhem as a veterinary neurologist with a strong focus on neurological breed-related hereditary disease. If Paul was not busy enough, he is also supervising 5 PhD projects. He's an ECVN supervisor, which on his own is a job, to be honest. He is a member of the Expertise Center of Genetics of the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, member of the International Veterinary Epilepsy Task Force and also the Dyskinesia Task Force, and the Fair Dog, you'll have to explain what it is, Paul, steering committee working on promoting breeding of healthy pets. Tonight, Citlalli and Paul will present to us their latest paper on the effect of MRI-based screening and selection on the prevalence of Syringomyelia in the Dutch and Danish Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. Before we start, maybe you want to tell us a bit more about the Fair Dog, Paul, because I didn't have a chance to ask you what it is.
Fair Dog is actually a foundation created by the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, a group of breeders, and the veterinary profession. So our veterinary association, the faculty and breeders created this foundation, and the goal is to create a platform where breeders can actually, if they want to do their best, they have to prove, of course, that they are doing their best. They can sort of, it's not selling, but sort of selling their puppies. So what we want to do is stimulate healthy breeding. And that's this study is actually sort of, it also belongs to Fair Dog, because what we want is healthy dogs.
Of course. And it's a fantastic initiative, bridging the gap between us, veterinary professional, and also the breeder. And having that communication, I think it's an amazing initiative, to try to improve things, because without that bridge, trying to improve things is fruitless. So definitely really good initiative. Thank you very much to both of you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, great.
I put your presentation first, Paul.
And then I click here?
On the full screen.
Okay. So it's now full screen?
It worked perfectly, all yours.
Okay, great. Well, this is a study where it's actually the work of, you could say, 20 years of work. because what we did is, and I will explain it, because what we actually evaluated was the MRI-based screening of the Cavalier in the Netherlands and Denmark. Denmark, not the complete period, and what it did on the prevalence of Syringomyelia. Well, we are already introduced, so I can skip this slide. And the reason why we performed this study is actually, it dates back to 2010, and it has all to do with this company, the BBC, because the BBC broadcasted a documentary, and it's called Pedigree Dogs Exposed. After this documentary, because it was first presented in the UK, I think in 2009, in the Netherlands in 2010, then well, everybody sort of rose against the pedigree dog, because this is a Dutch newspaper, and it's actually written here, crusade against the pedigree dog, and here it's written underneath left, who's not scanning is actually a killer of the breed. And here, of course, is a Basset with all these abnormalities, and the newspapers were constantly full of it. And this documentary actually created a large effect in the Netherlands, because not only there were many papers in the national newspapers, we also made our own shocking documentary, which was a sort of Pedigree Dogs Exposed 2, and there were a lot of questions in the parliament. And the minister had to address these questions, and he didn't like it, of course. So he said, because this Pedigree Dogs Exposed documentary used, among others, the Cavalier as an example to show that pedigree dogs are not very healthy. So the minister said, Cavalier Club Netherlands and Dutch Kennel Club, come to my office and explain what you are going to do to improve these breeds, this breed and other breeds. So they were forced to take action. And that's actually the start of this study, because, well, they created a covenant, and that means that all the Cavaliers, if you're breeding a Cavalier in the Netherlands and you want a pedigree, the dog had to be screened. And screened means that you are making an MRI. It doesn't say that the dog should be healthy, but that there should be an MRI, and there was a cardiac examination, and there were DNA tests and all these other things. But at least there was a plan. And I should say that based on the work of Claire Rusbridge, the breeders in the Netherlands, some of the breeders already started in 2000 on a voluntary basis to screen their dogs. And as of 2017, the screening is now also done in Denmark. And we are using this data as well, because there is a huge sort of mix between the Danish and the Dutch dogs. Now, I should explain that in the Netherlands, you are obliged as a breeder to screen your dog. But in all other countries, as far as we know, it's only done on a voluntary base, and there are no binding rules. And please make note of it, the breed is now forbidden in Norway. So only in Denmark and in the Netherlands, there is a sort of obliged screening, and you need to take action if the dog is, let's say, severely affected, or etc. Now, what do we screen? How do we screen? What we actually do is we make a mini MRI scan, and it's only for the breeders. Then it's easy to perform, and it's of course cheap. And what we do is we make a T1 and T2 weighted sagittal MRI scan from thalamus up to C4, and a transverse over at least the head, the middle ear region, and a transfer T1, T2 weighted at least the part of C2 and C4. And then we score, of course, whether there is Syringomyelia, etc. I will show that in a few seconds. Now, in the Netherlands, we have 5 MRI centers, but the majority of the scans are actually made in the city of Best. So Best is a city, and they are having a low field scanner, and in Arnhem, and that's us, and we have a high field scanner. And in Denmark, there are 2 MRI centers, and they have a high field scanner. And there are several rules. So, for instance, the chip number needs to be checked. It needs to be on the DICOM files, etc., etc. But the most important one is that if the scan is not correct, then it's rejected. So it should be good. You should be able to evaluate it. And what we evaluate is, of course, Syringomyelia, whether they have KI-like malformation or not, miliary effusion, all these atlantoaxial problems, the ventricular system, etc. And the breeder gets an official report, and the report is just sent by normal mail. So the idea is that it's very difficult to fraud. Now, there are breeding recommendations. They already were created, and that's all done by the work of Claire Rusbridge. And these breeding recommendations, the first one, were quite complicated, because if a dog was abnormal, then you could, for instance, only breed it with a normal dog, and it should have a certain age. And this scheme was slightly complicated. It was sort of improved around, let's say, 2005, I think. But it's, and this I should stress, for instance, here you see the letter A, and it means it's a dog older than 2.5 years of age, but it could still have a syringomyelia, or at least a central canal dilatation up to 2 millimeters. And you could still breed it with another dog that's abnormal. And in the Netherlands, we have a saying, shit in means shit out. So what you're actually doing is nothing. Because if you think, or if we say this is a hereditary disease, if you're using 2 affected animals, then nothing comes out of it, nothing good comes out of it. And another thing is, this is work from also Claire's group. It was published in the Veterinary Record in 2011. There's a late onset, they call it a late onset disease. So in time, the Syringomyelia is getting worse. So that means if you're scanning, for instance, a very young dog, the result is not very reliable, or at least not reliable. And in a study we performed, for instance, in 2017, we found that of these young dogs, 30% develops in the end Syringomyelia. So a young dog doesn't mean anything if it's healthy at a young age. So what they concluded around, let's say, 2011, is that if we want to reduce Syringomyelia, then we should say, okay, take age in consideration, and maybe we should do more and simplify the scheme in such a way that it's easier to be used. And they created in the UK the BVA, so that's the British Veterinary Association Kennel Club scheme. And the Kennel Club scheme is actually scoring Chiari-like malformation and Syringomyelia, but most important is that they are creating 3 age groups. C means 1 up to 3, B means 3 up to 5, and A means every dog older than 5. And they screen, of course, or they score, of course, the Chiari-like malformation and Syringomyelia. And the system is quite simple. If there is no indication of a central canal dilatation or fluid-filled cavity, or whatever you want to call it, it's grade 0. If it's up to 2 millimeters, then we say it's grade 1. And if it's more, then we say it's grade 2, because you can see here that there are large syrinxes, and this is, of course, a severely affected animal. Now, the disadvantage of this scheme is that you're actually, because the dilatation of the central canal is, of course, a continuous variable, and it's not a categorical variable. So there is a disadvantage if you're using such a scheme. And another disadvantage of this scheme is that they sort of allow the breeders to still use affected dogs. For instance, here is written 2A, so that means it's a dog older than 5, but it has a syrinx, or at least a central canal dilatation of more than 2 millimeters, and you can still breed it with, for instance, a dog with older than 5 with a syrinx less than 2 millimeters. And that's again shit in, shit out. So I think it's a nice scheme, but it might not work. So the current situation, both in Denmark and in the Netherlands, is that the breeders have to screen their dogs. They are obliged to at least comply with the BVA Kennel Club breeding recommendations. And lucky for us, some of these breeders use stricter guidelines, and they exclude, for instance, parental dogs that are affected. And in Denmark, they also raised the bar a bit higher. So they said the riskiest combinations, so all these dogs with the 2A and 1A, they are banned as well. Because they said, if we want to improve, we should at least try to use only unaffected animals. Now, we already published in 2017 a paper where we actually looked at the heritability grade of the BVA Kennel Club scheme and compared it with our measurement, because we are measuring it in millimeters and the BVA Kennel Club is scoring it in grade 0, 1, and 2. And you can see that the heritability grade of the scheme of the BVA Kennel Club is quite low, and the one we are using is higher. And that means this has a low, the chance that you are improving the breed using this scheme is actually quite low, and it improves if you're using this scheme. And the study we are now presenting is actually the question is, are we able to improve? And that's this one. Now, in our study, we said, okay, we're not going to look at CM, the Chiari-like malformation of PSOM. And the reason is that it would make things too complicated. First of all, 99% of our dogs is suffering from Chiari-like malformation, and PSOM is a completely different disorder. So we said, we are going to define in this study healthy as a dog without a visible central canal dilatation, central canal, or a fluid-filled cavity of syrinx, and we are ignoring the grading system of the BVA Kennel Club. So we are comparing healthy dogs, they are completely normal, with dogs with something. Because as far as I'm concerned, you have two phenotypes, a healthy dog and a sick dog. And there's no such thing as a slightly sick dog or severe sick dog. They are all sick. And an owner wants a not sick dog, a healthy dog. Now, the research questions we had are quite simple. Is there a reduction in Syringomyelia over time? Because we are already scanning for 27 years. And if the breeders would only use unaffected Cavaliers, what would be the effect? So only use unaffected animals. And what's the effect of a sire or of a bitch? And this means that I'm now going to hand the floor over to Citlalli, and she will present our results.
Yeah, thank you. So I assume you can now see my slides. As Laurent mentioned in my introduction, I did mathematical biology, so I did a lot of the math in this project. So first I'm going to talk a bit about the population, about the dog data that we were using. So we had a lot of MRI scans. We had 2,354 MRI scans, and that was of 2,125 dogs, and they were mostly Danish and Dutch Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. And what was very beautiful about this data set is that for 340 dogs, we not only had the scan of the dog itself, but also a scan of the mother and the father. So that was very useful to do pedigree analysis and risk assessment. Another thing that was very interesting about our population is that the median scan age was 2.72 years of age. So we had dogs that were very young, over half a year of age, up until 11 years of age. And yeah, this will be relevant because that's the age the dogs are getting scanned. So the first thing we saw was the prevalence of Syringomyelia to see whether this has decreased and how it looks through time. And as Paul mentioned, we took dogs as affected if they have a dilation of at least 0.5 millimeters, so a visible syrinx. And the dogs had a mean of 2 millimeters. So yeah, the mean was pretty high. And we saw, like other articles previously saw as well, that the prevalence increases per age. So here you can see age group A, over 5 years, we have 51% of the dogs affected. Age group B, which is between 3 and 5 years, we have 50% of the dogs affected. And for younger dogs between 1 and 3 years, we still have 28% of affected dogs. It's important to notice that most of the dogs that we have scans from are younger. So dogs are being scanned at a younger age. And that the percentage of affected per age group increases with age. So what are the odds of being affected based on the age category and in sex, to see if there's any other factors that influence whether the dogs are affected or not? So sex has no influence, so it doesn't matter whether the dogs are male or female, they have the same likelihood of being affected. However, there is a risk with age. So the older the age of the dog, the higher the risk. And as you can see here, the risk of being affected when you're older than 5 years is almost 3 times higher than when you're at age of 1 year or less. So that's important to note. This graph represents the number of screened individuals per year of birth. So we can see how many animals are screened per year of birth of the dog. And as you can see, there is an increase in the screened animals. So that's very logical since screening became mandatory, but it's also very positive because we're getting a lot of data from this. And from this data, we could also see that the percentage of affected individuals per year of birth also has a trend. And this trend is fortunately going down. So as more and more animals are getting screened, and there is some selection going on, the percentage of affected individuals per year is going down. So now we also saw the risk of Syringomyelia based on the parental MRI screening results. So if the mother and father are affected, what is the risk of the offspring of being affected? And first we saw it based on maternal status. So if the mother is affected or unaffected, what's the risk for the offspring? And for this, as I mentioned, we have 340 animals with both maternal and paternal data, and we have 210 bitches that were used there. So some of the bitches were used twice or more times, so that's why we have 340 offspring and 210 bitches. And the percentage of affected offspring, you can see here that we have bitches that are free of the 3 age groups and bitches that are not free of the 3 age groups. And you can see color-coded that when the bitch is free of Syringomyelia, the percentage of affected offspring is between 17 and 31%. However, when the bitch is not free, it goes from 50% up to 68%. So there is an increase, a difference between whether you use a free of Syringomyelia bitch or a bitch that is not free of Syringomyelia. We, of course, had to put numbers and math to it to see if that is actually the case. So yeah, that's exactly what we did. And we saw whether sex of the offspring, age of the offspring, the status of the bitch, and the age of the bitch was screened at has an effect on the status of the offspring. And we saw no sex effect. So it doesn't matter, again, whether the offspring was male or female. It also didn't matter what age the mother had. However, we did find an increased risk based on the age of the offspring. So again, the older the offspring, the more risk. And we find almost twice more likely for the offspring to get affected if the bitch is affected. So it's almost 2 times more likely to be affected if your mother is affected. We did the exact same thing for the males, for the sires, and for this we have 95 sires. So again, sire dogs get used more often, so we have more offspring, but 95 males. We again separated them from free of Syringomyelia and not free, and per age category, and you can see a similar trend that we saw with the bitches, where where the percentage of affected offspring is between 27 and 35% for males that are free of Syringomyelia, and between 34 and 62% if the males are affected with Syringomyelia. So it's a trend very similar to the one in the bitches. We did the math again, and we found very similar results where there is no sex effect and no effect based on the age of scan of the father. However, as again, like with the bitches, we found a higher risk if the offspring was of an older age, and it is 1.7 times more likely to be affected with Syringomyelia if the father is affected. So the risk is not as high as it is with the mothers, but there is still risk of being affected if the father is affected. So now what we wanted to do is see if the combination of both parents has an effect. So we saw all possible combinations of males and females of all 3 age groups, and we saw this. So it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of information, but the most important, the takeaway of this graph is that here the green are lower percentages of offspring that's affected, and the red has higher percentage of offspring that's affected. And we can see the trend that when you look at the animals, both female and male, that are free of Syringomyelia, you have a lower chance of getting affected offspring. So that's the takeaway. And when it comes to the risk, because we did the same analysis, we saw very similar results. No effect on the sex of the offspring, no effect on the age category of the parents. However, there is, again, effect on the age of the offspring. And this is very important, that it's 3 times more likely to be affected with Syringomyelia if both the parents, the mother and the father, are affected. So this is a very important point, and it's why we are recommending not to breed with 2 affected animals. It's 3 times more likely that the offspring will get affected. So now we'll return to Paul's slides for the final part of the seminar. Thank you.
You may have to share your screen, Paul.
Is it visible?
No, we can't see your screen yet, Paul.
Oh, I need to. Okay, sorry. Share screen.
I think you remove it this time.
Yeah, it's always complicated.
Give me the opportunity. If you have any question, just put it in the comment, and I will ask Paul and Citlalli at the end.
So now,
Paul.
So now it's visible. Yes. Yes.
No, okay. Mine are visible.
Yours is visible.
Yeah. Okay. Now yours are visible. Yeah. Now it's visible.
Mine is visible now?
Oh, you just remove it, Paul. If you put it back.
Oh, okay.
Not to worry.
It's always interesting. Technique. Yes?
Very good. We can see it. Perfect.
Okay.
All yours.
So we are left with a big question mark, of course, and of course an ID. Now I should say that in Norway, they have banned, in the beginning, they banned both the Cavalier as well as the English Bulldog from breeding, because the animal welfare organization went to court and they said, this is a very diseased breed, it cannot be cured, it cannot be saved. And they had a second ruling, and then they said, okay, the English Bulldog can still be saved, because there is room for improvement, but this is not the case in the Cavalier. And I was quite surprised by it, because one of the arguments was that the Cavalier is always suffering from pain, which is of course not the case. Only a small percentage of the dogs is actually suffering from clinical signs. And these English Bulldogs are constantly having respiratory problems. So I found it a bit strange. But anyway, in Norway, the Cavalier is banned. And if it would only be the Cavalier, then I would say, okay, skip the Cavalier, create Cavalier 2.0, do something. But it's not only the Cavalier, because we just published a paper on the Pomeranians. And it's a group of, in this study, 796 dogs. And it's actually the first paper of Koen Santi for his PhD, where we looked at the Pomeranian and whether they were suffering from GI-like malformation and Syringomyelia. And we found that 25% of the Pomeranians is suffering from Syringomyelia. And we are actually at the moment writing a paper where we looked at a cohort of toy breeds that were scanned over a period of 8 years. And actually what we found is that all these toy breeds are suffering from GI malformation and Syringomyelia. And this has already been reported in several papers. But they are all suffering from it. So if the Norwegian people are sort of sensible, then they should ban all these toy breeds because they are all affected. And you could say, why not ban all breeds? Because all breeds are suffering from various disorders, and several of these disorders are hereditary. So they should actually have published this paper. Norway has banned all dog breeds because all dog breeds are suffering from something. Now, to conclude, because it should be a happy story, well, I have some remarks. An important thing is that the majority of the screen dogs are still young. And if you realize that it's a late onset disease, it doesn't say a lot. If you're doing it because you, as a breeder, you want to say, okay, my dog is affected, my young dog, so it's going to be replaced, then I think it's a sensible thing. But if you're intending to use it, it's not a sensible thing. And another thing is, if you're using a low field scanner, it's possible to miss a small syrinx or fluid-filled cavity. It's possible. So ideally, we only use high field scanners, but that means that then they should be there. And another thing is, it's beautiful that the Danish and the Dutch people are scanning, but in other countries, it's only done on a voluntary base. So I see on a regular base some scans from Poland, Czechia, of Germany, etc. But only a few breeders are doing it. And if you are importing, for instance, a Cavalier that has parents that are not screened, it doesn't say anything. It could be that this dog is still going to get Syringomyelia or has a high risk in spreading it. But the nice thing is, selection is possible. So my remark to the Norwegian people is, selection is possible. And if you want healthy dogs, if you want healthy Cavaliers, it's possible. And the only thing is that the breeders need to take action. And to be honest, I don't think it should take 27 years. I think it should be able to do that. You should be able to improve the breed in, let's say, 1 or 2 generations. It shouldn't take 27 years. So our recommendations, and these recommendations are sent at the moment, they are already sent to the Danish Kennel Club as well as the Dutch Danish Kennel Club, and they will be sent to the Kennel Club of the UK. Our recommendation is refine the current BVA Kennel Club scheme in such a way that you should say any dog with a visible fluid-filled cavity or central canal or whatever, call it affected. The phenotype healthy means it's normal, and the phenotype affected means that there is something going on. And you should not breed with such a dog. If you want improvement, don't use it. And if you want real improvement, only use the dogs older than 3 years of age. And of course, I realize that it might be a bit difficult with bitches, but if you really want improvement, use only the older dogs. Because this is what owners want. A happy, healthy dog. And children playing with it. And they don't want unhealthy dogs.
Thank you very much, Paul and Citlalli, for this great presentation. There was a question, but I think you already covered it to some degree, from Sod Johansson. How common is carie malformation in other dog with a small skull? Are there any comparative studies showing that? Which I think you kind of cover, but among all these small, toy breeds, apart from the Cavalier and the Pom, is there any other, top breed that you think we'll see more often than others?
Yeah, it's visible in all these breeds. Of course, the frequency or prevalence varies. So in the Pomeranian, it's less than in the Cavalier, and that's the reason why we are doing a genetic study in the Pomeranian, because in the Cavalier, the majority of the dogs is affected, and you need, of course, normal controls for a genetic study.
While we wait for other questions, I just had a few. Obviously, the UK has a kind of unusual situation, being an island and having, limited chance for exchange of dog, due to the obviously rabies control. Do you think that the recommendation, which were based on the conclusion of your paper, can be applied to other countries, for example, the UK or other parts of the world like North America? Do you think it's exactly the same, or the same study will have to be done in all these different, country with possibly a different genetic pool?
The dogs we are using are called Dutch and Danish dogs, but their parents, or they are actually originating from the UK or Belgium or France or Germany or Holland, etc. So there's a huge, well, they are constantly importing and exporting these Cavaliers. So I don't think that's the issue. And some of the Danish breeders asked me if we would exclude all affected animals, what would it mean for our population? And it would mean that half of the population would be excluded. That's, yeah.
That's the price to pay to have a healthy breed.
Yeah. But there are, the number of Cavaliers is huge. If you compare it to, for instance, now not Pomeranians, because they are also in numbers quite high. But if you're looking, for instance, at a small breed like, for instance, we have the Dutch Marquise, there are only 600 of them. Then it's very difficult to exclude dogs.
Of course. And another question I had is, you look at obviously the parents. Do we know if Syringomyelia can skip a generation?
Actually, there was one paper of Claire Rusbridge and her mother, where they looked at the grandparents as well, but they were still using the old scheme with the A's, the C's, and the D's, and etc. And they saw an effect of the grandparents. So what we will do next is that we are looking also at the number of dogs where the grandparents are also scanned. And what we think we will prove is that if you're using parents whose parents are unaffected, the effect will be even greater. And the bad thing is, of course, if you're importing a dog from, let's say, a different country, you're scanning it and it's free. But if the parents of this dog, one of these parents was affected, the chance that this dog is actually giving affected puppies is still present. So it's not that it's skipping it, it's genetics.
Well, yeah, absolutely. What I mean is that it could be a carrier or give the condition even if he was not affected, himself.
Yeah.
No, but I think it would be interesting because obviously the study was based mostly on the parents on that.
Mhm.
And I think the last question is, do we have much information about the natural history of the disease? I mean, it's something that we hear quite a lot on clinic, when you diagnose a dog with Syringomyelia. If it's a young dog, is not showing any sign, and you may have found Syringomyelia by accident because you were scanning the dog for something else. I would say almost every single pet owner will ask you, can it get worse with time? So do we have any data that tell us where we follow dog throughout their life, and having had the chance to scan them regularly, do we know the natural history of the disease?
Yeah, with the Cavalier, it's quite difficult because a lot of this is a study using dogs intended for breeding, so they are not clinical dogs because you're not allowed to breed with a dog with clinical signs. But actually, we are doing this Pomeranian study, and we already have scanned over 1,000 Pomeranians, and we are doing a follow-up study.
Yeah.
Just today, we got note that the paper was accepted, but it's only 16 Pomeranians that we did a follow-up in. But we are going to do a follow-up study in these 1,000 Pomeranians, where we will scan them at least 2 years in between. So they are now, let's say, scanned at between 1 and 3, and they will be scanned again 2 years later, etc., etc. And then we can at least do the follow-up. And what we are actually doing in these Pomeranians, we are making a high-field MRI scan, and it's not a mini scan, it's a bit more than a mini scan. We are doing also a CT scan, and we are using artificial intelligence to look at these scans. So to improve our phenotyping, because that's important for our genotyping.
Absolutely. No, that would be fantastic because it's, as I say, it's a practical question that every clinician is facing, and we basically don't know what to say, in this situation. Citlalli and Paul, thank you so much for, giving up your time this evening. I think, you very well portray the importance of bridging the gap again between, the breeder and the veterinary science, because without that, we may be between us talking about how to improve things, but if the message is not then passed on to the owner, we're only doing half of the job. So I think you're doing a great job, and I hope that, with time, this will pay to improve the welfare, in this breed. But thank you so much. We will have another webinar in a couple of months. The subject is still to be decided, but if you are a young neurologist or a resident in training and you want us to, show all your results, Paul is laughing, but I will still consider
I'm old.
you and I as young at heart at least. But yeah, if you want to have this platform to present your work, please contact us, and we'll be delighted, to basically show all your hard work. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.